Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Method in Madness. This is episode number 49. We are just one episode away from half a century, actually. So, thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. And today we are going to talk about one of my favorite and very important topics, why children must be exposed and should read Indian authors. When we were growing up, we did not have too many Indian writers whom we could read, especially the ones who would write in English. I grew up in a Bengali household, and so I had lots of books to read, but in Bengali. I'm sure this has been the case with children from different parts of the country. But today we are at a much better space. And to talk about that, we have with us Vidya Mani. Vidya is a children's writer and editor who wears many hats. She runs a content and design studio called Melting Pot that creates children's books and magazines for publishers and NGO. She is one of the founder members of Funky Rainbow, a traveling bookshop and book consultancy that is committed to bringing books and children together in exciting and innovative ways. We are really, really blessed and privileged to have you with us, Vidya. Welcome to Method in Madness.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to Method in Madness. Vaishali, absolutely a pleasure to be here. Even before we start off, 49 episodes online. Wow, that is a big, big achievement. So, congratulations to you and Chashwat for doing this and bringing maybe Method in Madness to many people's lives.
Perhaps this was the whole idea when we started last April, Vidya. We missed a few, from last April to this April, but we started in April last year. And just like you, all the people that I knew and I spoke to were extremely considerate, and they came they just said yes to whenever I asked them to come. So it's just because of people like you who are invested in this kind of work already. And it's time that we reach out to more and more people and create a community of our own. So thank you for doing this, and thanks to all our audience members who have
Yes.
been with us for the last 50 episodes, like 49 episodes. Because without them, this is completely, it's redundant if it's
Yes.
not for them. All right. Thank you so much again for everybody for joining. Everybody, just to let you know, Vidya and I, we are going to talk for the next 45 minutes, and then we'll be open to your questions. But as we talk, you can join us in our conversation through the live comment section. I can see already people have joined in: Pavitra, Deepak, Smita, Arun, everyone. So please do join us in the conversation, and we'll be very delighted to take your comments also as we speak. All right. Why children must read Indian authors and titles? Um Vidya, this is something that I have been wanting to do for a very long time. Because right now, when I look around, I see so many Indian, authors writing and publishing, and really, making a mark. Uh, but when we were growing up, I was just talking about when we were growing up. There weren't any, not a big number of Indian English authors. So tell us a little bit about your journey when you were growing up. Uh, what kind of exposures that you got during your growing up years in this field, in this world of books?
Yeah. First of all, a very, very warm welcome to all the guests who are watching us on a Saturday evening, on a Sunday
Sunday
evening.
evening.
Sunday evening, yes. For some of you who've, abandoned your IPL matches, my gosh, really, I'm indeed honored and privileged that so many of you are here watching, us talk about books. It is a pretty challenging time all over the country. And I think For most of us who are, watching and talking today, there's no greater solace than between the pages of a book. I mean, in these challenging times, at least I think the bookshelves at Funky Rainbow, the traveling children's bookshop that I have co-founded with two other people, or the comfort between the pages of the book really keep us going. So my journey with books began really, I think even before I was born. My mother, my parents were compulsive readers, and my mother, I remember, just surrounded us with books. I mean, there were books everywhere. There were more books than other things in my house, basically. I mean, there were books in the cupboards. There were books that were not in the cupboards. There were books in the bathroom, and there were books in the kitchen. So it was a very integral part of growing up. Also, for people in in the generation, I mean, in my generation, there was really, just two things that you could do. You could read, or you could go outside and play with your friends. And so books were really an integral part of my, growing up years. The difference, between the books that, I introduce to children today and that we take to schools, is that, in the, growing up in the 70s and 80s, I largely read British literature that was available in English to all of us. And by that, I'm talking about Enid Blyton, I'm talking about, several Peter Pan, just the, naughty books, the famous
Mm.
fives, the secret
Five, yes.
sevens. And then, maybe going out, just William. I was a big fan of the Richmal Crumpton books, basically, of all the William stories.
Mm.
That was those were the kinds of books that really, were part and parcel of our growing up. In fact, I remember we were members. My mother would, had taken memberships in several libraries that were in and around our house, including the mandatory British Council library
Yes.
membership as well, right?
I like that word mandatory that you
It
added.
was it
Yeah,
was
I think it
mandatory for
was
many
mandatory.
houses. Who My mother was a teacher, so the
Yeah.
access to the
Mm.
British Library was just mandatory. And so you would go to the library, you would interact with
Mm.
the people who ran those libraries, and they would recommend books for you. And I mean, I grew up reading all kinds of literature. There were the classics. There was, I remember when Archie comics came up,
Mm.
that was like a huge fad. You would be reading everything about Riverdale High, even if you couldn't understand what on earth that school really was like, really, right? I think the only Indian writers that I may have been introduced to, in my growing up years, R.K. Narayan,
Yes.
definitely, with Malgudi Days. I
Malgudi
mean,
days.
there
Mm.
was Ruskin Bond, of course,
Mm.
the evergreen Ruskin Bond. And I too, like you, Vaishali, grew up in Calcutta. I spent my first 8 years in Calcutta. So Satyajit Ray was,
Mm.
with Guppy Gain, Bagabain, and, all of those were also an integral part of my, growing up years. Although I want to say that, and those were perhaps the only Indian writers that may have come into my purview, in those years. But I do remember my dad subscribed for this fantastic magazine, for me, called Target. And Target was the kind of magazine, I mean, that I just absolutely loved reading it. I came to it a little later, maybe when I was a little older, but still the stories in Target, the comic strips, the cartoons, there was such a wonderful connection with some of those, simply because many of them were contextually very, very Indian. So that
Mm.
was, pretty much my introduction to Indian writers and Indian illustrators in my growing up years. I joke with a lot of people. I say this to my colleagues at work very often, saying that the first time I went to London and got off, I could have recognized every single road that I stepped into, simply because of the Monopoly board. Oxford Street, Bond Street, Regent Street, they were all such familiar
And
names.
also the stories, yes.
all over. You knew all of that simply
Yes.
because you had read that much British literature. But had you
Mm,
dropped me then somewhere in the heartland of Tamil Nadu or West Bengal,
mm,
I doubt I may have been able to rattle off that many names really.
mm.
But yes, books an essential and absolutely integral part of my growing up years, part of my teenage, part of my college years, and now even as a working professional. Yeah, they are the constant in my life for sure.
You were just talking about libraries and how they used to be these little neighborhood libraries. I remember I used to go to this uncle who did not even have a proper library. He just had a stall,
Oh,
and he would the library membership was 20 rupees. I remember that till today because I used to take those take those 2 10 rupee notes from my mom and give it to him, and we used to borrow magazines and books from him. um, if I remember, the last time I saw a library of this sort was in Def Call. Again, a tattered library
mhm.
in Defense Colony in Delhi,
Delhi.
and the membership fee was some $100. Even now, I mean, it's not that big, but there were few people who were coming in and borrowing books. What have I mean, what has happened to the entire library culture? I don't see it anywhere anymore. And how do you think libraries have transformed? Have to become bookstores?
I wouldn't say, they've become bookstores, but yes, it's been very, very difficult to, you know, it. A lot of these things, requires, also some financial backing. You need to be able to sustain these libraries. But Bangalore, the city that I am in at the moment, does have some wonderful libraries. I mean, really some fantastic children's libraries tucked away in different nooks and corners of the city. Perhaps not the 100 rupee libraries anymore because
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
it's harder to sustain at those prices at the moment. And if libraries got some government support or support from larger corporations, I'm sure they would be able to reduce the prices considerably. But I believe that every city has some wonderful libraries that are spread across the city, and all it takes is for you to dig around a bit and find those spaces, really, right? I mean, I used to have a membership I worked for many years in Madras, and I used to have a membership in a library called Ellur, which is a beautiful wonderful library full of books for adults and books for children. I remember when I moved to Bangalore, they also have a wonderful branch up here in Bangalore, which is absolutely at the other end, from my house at the moment.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
still, if you take the trouble, I mean, you can travel great distances to see a movie, or you're going somewhere to do, something. So finding those right libraries, is the impetus of us adults, especially if you want to take children to the libraries. I mean, when I was growing up, my mother is the one who facilitated and found those libraries for me, right? So I do think that all cities, and I do know Delhi has the wonderful community library project that Mridula
Yes.
Koshi runs, and there are
Hmm.
a couple of libraries that they've set up in different parts of the city. Like I said, in Bangalore, there's Hippocampus Children's Library, there is Kahani Box. There are several lovely spaces, and a library is Alibaba's cave for
Hmm.
for children, right? For reading children and for adults. I mean, it's a haven away from the pell mell and the chaos of this world. You can just quietly sit down, you can browse through the shelves, you can even pick up from
Yes.
those shelves where school libraries may not allow you to pick some particular
Hmm.
books, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And discovering is the beauty of being in a library is to discover books that you may want to read with
Yes.
with the help of a friendly neighborhood library uncle or auntie, like you said,
Hmm.
egging you
Hmm.
on, right? The lovely
Yes.
thing is that today, in the Indian context too, there are several books for children. I mean, at Funky Rainbow, which is the children's bookshop, that I'm a co-founder of, we have 8,500 plus titles. all Indian children's books, largely curated from across the country, meant for different age groups, 0 to 18. So, the better libraries in the cities, that parents are going to, will have a great mix of Western and Indian children, or should at least have a good mix of Indian and Western children's books. And really, there's nothing quite like a trip to the library. So I know parents have really busy routines, and children have even busier routines. Like, right? I
Mm.
mean, when I see my colleagues as children, I think, gosh, they are like way more busy than we are, right? Come back from school, designated time to play,
Oh yes.
designated time for classes, I mean, designated time for some, music, or, one of those things. Just into that routine, put this lovely thing of visiting a library, go with your child,
Mm.
and school libraries as well. School libraries can be treasure troves. I went to a school that had a wonderful library, which was one that was meant for the primary school children, for the middle grade children, children, and for the senior kids. But we had a window library. Every class had a windowsill library, which
Mm.
wherein the librarian contributed some books, and all of us, and we were a small class, we were 20 children in our class, all of us brought our favorite books as well,
I
and
think
you
that's a
contribute.
brilliant idea. I
Yeah,
think we
yeah,
should just
yeah.
borrow this idea and
It's
and
just
copy
such an
paste it.
easy way.
Yeah, it's
There
a
were
very easy thing.
25 books that the librarian gave you, 20, 25 books that the children brought. And the kind of encouragement that kids
Mm.
get reading their peers' books. Like, supposing I went and put a book in that windowsill library as a child, and that one knew that this one was my favorite book. They're just so much more encouraged to read like that. And so, to parents and teachers watching, I mean, try to sneak in that 1 hour or 2 hours in a week where you too can switch off your phone, just the buzzes and beeps and blips of everything in your life, and spend that time in the library. Our libraries need our support.
They
And
do.
I know you
Absolutely.
asked about whether libraries are getting replaced by independent
Yes.
bookstores. Now,
Yes.
it was Independent Bookshop Day yesterday, and I think for everyone watching, you must find the indie bookshops in your city. They are just really the custodians of the city's culture, of a pace of life that we're all almost just forgetting at the moment. I mean, they know you, they know your tastes. They grow up. If you have children, like we have children who come to Funky Rainbow, who came when they were 4 or 5, and they're 10 now, right? And I think we have grown up with them as well, or we have stayed young at heart with them as
Them.
well. So independent bookstores in every
Yes.
city of India almost. And so whether it's a library or an independent bookstore, make that time to take your child there. There's just unimaginable treasures and pleasures tucked away in a library or an indie bookshop.
Yes, we are getting a lot. I mean, we're getting a lot of comments where people are saying where we can find libraries. I think Sindhu Deepak has mentioned one in Ernakulam. Yes, even
Okay.
Kochi has lots of small little libraries. Even Calcutta, I mean, for that
Yes.
matter. Uh, but
Yes.
I mean, these big cities like Delhi, or maybe if you go to smaller cities like Lucknow, or you go to not Mumbai but Nagpur, or maybe you go to Kottayam. I mean, I think there is a cultural heritage that all of us have, regional cultural heritage, as well as an Indian cultural heritage. So,
Right.
so one must go and explore, as you rightly said.
Yes. Yes.
But
Absolutely.
Vidya, you also have been saying that your mother has been your support, your backbone with this whole love for books. uh, Many children and many parents would love for their children to go and read, pick up a book, but they themselves do not have the time, or maybe they don't have the inclination anymore to read. Now, for parents who cannot pick up a book right now and start reading, what can they do? That is something that we'll ask. I'll ask you this question, but a little later. Right now, let's go and talk about the topic of today's session: Indian authors. When Funky Rainbow started this, what was this whole idea that went behind only keeping Indian titles, and why?
Yeah. So, I think this was in 2013, that we, set up Funky Rainbow basically. We were a group of writers. I mean, the three of us at Funky Rainbow, there's, my partners, Shyam, Madhav, and Sharada, who is a writer, illustrator, photographer, filmmaker, and Muttama, who's a disability rights activist and a passionate reader of books as well. There was, as a group of writers and illustrators based out of Bangalore, there are several, people in the children's literature space who live and work out of Bangalore. We had gone to Delhi for the Bookaroo Festival, which is a very big children's festival that happens in Delhi and other cities across the country, in the pre-COVID times, basically, right? And at that festival, we were suddenly like, my gosh, you're from Bangalore, you're from Bangalore, you're from Bangalore, you're from Bangalore. And it was just this whole sea of people who had, who were writing and illustrating from children, for children who met at Delhi. And two of the writers, Asha Nehemiah, I can see she's watching the show, a wonderful writer for children, of course, and Vijay Lakshmi Nagaraj, who said, we must come together and do something in Bangalore. So the whole idea that came up was to set up like a traveling book club that introduced Indian books to children by doing events in parks and public spaces and in schools, in libraries, just across different places in the city. A couple of events into doing this, and we had fantastic reception to that whole book club because the writers, the children were, I think, who were attending the event, I think for the first time really sort of getting introduced to a lot of Indian writers and their books and having fun doing these sessions, when many parents came to us and said, look, we can't access these books anywhere. So if there's, one writer doing a session, let's say there's Asha Nehemiah or there's Nandini Nair or there's Ranjit Lal or Subhadra Sengupta doing events at the club, they couldn't, access these books anywhere. And these were times pre-Amazon times, although one always wonders whether there was ever a pre-Amazon time, right? But there was, believe me. So Shyam suddenly said, come on, we've been working in the children's literature space for so long. Why don't we just go ahead and set up a traveling bookshop? And I was like, are you mad? I mean, inventory and logistics and, managing all these things, billing, etc. And Muttama, who's a very, very dear friend of ours, walked in and said, what is it that cannot be handled? Come on, let's just go ahead and do it, really, right? So we started off with a small collection of, say, 250, 300 books. I think in 2013 was 250 or 300 books that we had. We decided that we wanted to focus exclusively on Indian children's books. It's not like we don't have Western children's books at Funky Rainbow, but it's just a small curated collection of slightly more unusual books than all the mainstream ones. So we decided that we were the best champions of books that were created by Indian writers and illustrated by Indian illustrators. And every product, whether it's a book or whether it's a piece of fabric or whether it is like a gizmo or a gadget, requires good spokespeople. You require to speak about it. You should be able to tell the child who's coming and picking up a Geronimo Stilton, saying that, why don't you try this as well? It's quite nice. These books are equally nice. And so what started off as a one time a month, kind of initiative went, that bookshop just traveled and traveled and traveled and traveled. We have a big book truck now. It's a red book truck in which we carry our books here, there, everywhere. Pre-COVID, of course. All that has changed considerably in the COVID times, but we work a lot with schools. We work a lot with teachers as well. We work with students running reading programs to introduce books by Indian creators to them. We also work with teachers because we know that a lot of the books that exist in the Indian kidlit space, complements what they're teaching in the classroom, and sometimes, and not even sometimes, most of the times, does a far better job than the textbooks actually do. So we train teachers in using these books as supplementary reading material in the classroom, and what an exhilarating roller coaster ride it has been for us. But yes, I mean, we're very clearly focused on Indian children's books. I just think being Desi is a great way to be, really, right?
Yes, it is a great way to be. Also, it also kind of makes you more thoughtful when you're thinking about your own culture. It does not, it gives you a lens of your own. And Also, I feel that you become more rooted in your own skin when you're reading about another girl who looks exactly like you and who has
Mhm.
problems exactly like yours.
Yes.
So yeah, because when we were reading, it's not nothing against the books that used to come from,
No.
translated books from Russia. My father used to, there used to be this huge, Kolkata book fair, the very famous Kolkata book fair.
Very, very famous, yes.
So we used to really wait for that book fair to happen, and my dad would take a holiday, take a chutti from office, and we would spend the whole day at the book fair. So, yeah, Indian books do matter. But tell me a little bit about what kind of books do you see right now in the in this domain of Indian authors.
Right.
What is it that is kind of really looking up, and you are really, and giving you a lot of hope as an author yourself, and as a book shop owner?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your comment about looking forward to the Kolkata Book Fair, just kicked something in my head. I grew up in Kolkata as well,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
when you said Russian books, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm digressing from that question,
That's fine.
but there used to be this beautiful. There was this big book ship that would
Mm.
go past, and Kolkata. I mean, after, I think, docking in Cochin, and then go past Vishakhapatnam and then to Kolkata, it would dock in Strand
At
in
Strand Road. Yes, yes.
yeah.
Mm.
For an entire week, the ship used to be full of Russian books. And the greatest thing that, of that weekend would be to go both days and run up and down the decks of the ship, choosing books as you wanted, priced at, I don't know, 50 paise, 1 rupee, 2 rupees. In
Mm.
fact, when we decided to set up Funky Rainbow, it was so ironic that all three of us who, came together to do this had a traveling model in mind. And for me, it was entirely connected to the fact that this book ship used to come to Kolkata. And I hope in my head one day we'll have a book ship as well, a Funky Rainbow book ship that takes us. But
Wow.
with Sham and Muttama too, Sham grew up with the NBT vans. I saw one of the comments
Mm.
coming up
Mm.
saying, "I go to the NBT bookshops, every city that I travel to." But the NBT vans used to come to Cochin, where he grew up, and to Muttama as well. She was very, very conversant with a floating ship of books in Cochin. And so the minute the idea came up, we were like, I mean, we're not going to be able to afford any retail space. That's just out of the question. So ours is going to have to be a traveling model. And when you talked about the Kolkata Book Fair, what came back to my head was absolutely those wonderful, precious days spent at Strand, looking at books inside a ship, mind you, nothing else. What
My
could be more
goodness.
exciting?
What an experience. I can only imagine.
Really, really, really. But
Mm.
coming to Indian books, basically, we started really in the 19, I would imagine sometime in the 1970s, because really the concept of a Western literature, I mean, of a children's literature, came to us from the West, really,
Yes.
and I think it was in the early 70s when Shankar, whose museum and library are still in Delhi, of course, set up the Children's Book Trust.
Mm.
And back then, I think what both CBT and then which NBT, which got set up subsequently, the Nehru Bal Pustakale, which kind of got set up subsequently. The stories that came out then were largely sort of retellings of folk tales,
Mm.
stories from Indian mythology, and that's the kind of thing that most of those stories used to be somewhat, preachy, somewhat moralistic. I'm not saying that all their books are like that, but the early literature that came out in English, and in fact, I think CBT used to run a lot of competitions. They still do, and the prize-winning books from those competitions went on to become, children's books that got published. But this was, sometime in the 70s, and then even in the 80s. I remember NBT. I found out later when I was researching some, stuff on Indian children's writing. They ran a competition for illustrators to illustrate books, because in children's books the illustration plays such a significant role in
Yes,
getting
it
the
does.
child reading it. And if you examine some of those books from those early eras, you felt that the illustrators, Pulak Biswas, Mickey Patel, some of these illustrators took such giant leaps in illustration. I mean, they were so imaginative. They brought out some wonderful books that we read even today. I don't have a copy of this one to show you, but there's one which is a counting book, and it's called
Mm.
1 to 10 Procession. Okay, and guess what children count? It's a simple picture book. Children count Shadi Barat, and so there's like one horse, then there are two drummers, and then there are three, it's set in such a wonderfully Indian context, so beautifully illustrated by Mickey Patel, basically. So I felt in those early years, perhaps our, illustrators were making greater strides in being more creative and imaginative. But come the 90s, when there were a whole host of independent publishers who burst upon the scene, from Tulika, Tara, Parody Tales. I mean, they just started to put out so many culturally relevant books.
Yes.
And I believe, all children want to see themselves in the books. When you pick up a book, and you could be extremely happy and just read it for the pure pleasure of reading, but you may be, for instance, feeling quite bullied in school, or you may be feeling that your sibling has an unfair advantage over you. And when you can see those children and those situations in children's books, in the books that you're reading, it just makes such a great connect. So many discoveries, so many connections, so many beautiful things that can get sparked off. And it's just marvelous how Indian children's writers and illustrators have risen to that job so fabulously well. I mean, today we've got books and books. I mean, you name a theme and we could pull out books for you on that theme. Funky Rainbow does a
Yes.
weekend bazaar, where we recommend books, theme-based books, and we are stunned, whether it is gender stereotypes, whether it's just humor, whether it is grandmothers in children's books, whether it is LGBTQIA issues, whether it's sports. We've got a plethora of writers, newer publishers at the moment, like, Duckbill and, Pickle Yolk Books, and,
Yes.
just a whole host of them doing wonderful books for our children, where children can see themselves, the mirrors and windows that people keep talking about in books. Like, you should be able to see yourself, you should be able to understand the world around you. I think Indian writers and illustrators have done a magnificent job of it, really. And 8,500 plus books. And
Titles.
I'm sure there are thousands of more that we still need to discover. At Funky Rainbow, we have 8,500 plus Indian children's books at the moment. So, for me, collars up is like what I feel, and miles to go before we sleep. We just have 8,500 books. I mean, there's surely hundreds and thousands of them out there waiting to be discovered as well. So, a wonderful job done by Indian writers, illustrators, and publishers.
All right. So we would love for you to recommend some books And if we can just do it maybe age wise, it'll help our audience today over here.
Sure. It's
Yeah.
you're asking me to do what I do across 2 hours in like
And I love that
five
show that you
minutes.
do, and this is for everybody who's watching. Vidya does this 2 hours, I think 2 hours, or is it 1 hour?
It's typically about an hour. It's every Saturday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. It's up on
Yes.
Funky Rainbow's Facebook and YouTube channels. And, 11 to 12, we recommend. And then we have a guest who comes in who has books on that theme or who can talk about that theme very well. So I can talk to you for the next 2 hours about my favorite books, but I will limit myself to a couple that I have pulled out for you today. Books for our youngest readers. We often have parents who come in, to Funky Rainbow, and they'll say, "Well, my child is just like 2 months, old, or my child is just 5 months old or 6 months old. I'm sure there are no books that you have." But it's no, we do have books that you can read to your child even before the child is born. But we have some wonderful wordless picture books, and I'm going to show you one of my favorites. I hope I'm holding it up right, for you.
Yeah, we just
Um,
have this. Yeah,
is it
this is
okay?
yeah. This looks
Okay.
fine.
So,
Yeah,
a wonderful
Ammachi's
wordless
glasses. Yeah.
Ammachi's glasses. Yes, it's a delightful wordless picture book. I'm going to, show you a picture, from the book. I hope you can see it, clearly. A delightful, wonderful book about a grandmother. Ammachi is a grandmother in Kerala, a delightful grandmother who loses her glasses at the start of the story. And what follows is just sheer mayhem, sheer havoc, and thrill a minute pages. So she trips over the dog. She absolutely decides to wash the cat. She can't see all of the, she can't see anything. And the lovely thing about these wordless picture books, and I love this spread, she gets into her granddaughter's clothes actually, like, okay, into her night clothes, into the granddaughter's night
Yeah.
clothes. All right. The thing is, such a delightful story, no right or wrong story because there are no words. You read it with your child, and it's left to the child's imagination to understand what happens to Amachi's glasses. And she's an Amachi from Kerala, mind you. Everything in the way that Priya Kurian has illustrated this book reflects that the story is set in Kerala.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is one that I recommend for absolutely the youngest of readers. This, I think, many people may be familiar
Gajapati.
with. Gajapati Kulapati.
Gajapati.
Yes.
Okay. Hmm.
Okay. Can you see it clearly?
Yes, I can see it, and it's by Ashok Rajagopalan.
Rajagopalan. Yes.
Okay.
Forever we have loved Gajapati Kulapati because simply right from the name, the elephant is not Jumbo, the elephant is not Dumbo, the elephant is a nice Indian name, Gajapati Kulapati. What is this all about? Well, in this first book, the elephant Gajapati Kulapati, who has a long trunk, catches a cold. So while
Okay.
you and me may catch small colds, an elephant with a large trunk catches a really large cold. It is such a delight, this book, and I don't know of a single mother, or an older sibling or a grandparent that doesn't enjoy reading this book with children. The escapades
Yeah.
of the elephant. I mean, what happens? The village in which he lives in, they're so concerned that Gajapati has a cold, and they decide that they have to help Gajapati, get rid of the cold. The series became so popular that, Ashok Rajagopalan has 4 books in the Gajapati Kulapati series as of now.
And also many, I think I have seen storytellers picking this book up,
Yes.
and doing storytelling sessions. I've seen many
Yes.
actually do this.
Yes,
So
I
yeah.
mean, it lends itself so delightfully to storytelling. These books, the two that I showed you, were published by Tulika.
Hmm.
I'm going to show you one which has come, just a year, maybe a year and a half ago on our shelves, and I hope Asha is still watching. This is The Village with a Long Name, written by Asha Nehemiah and illustrated by Suvidha Mistry, which is such a delightful book about, about a village, where the street names. Okay, I
Oh,
can,
oh, you're back now. Yes,
okay, I think I can see, Shashwat saying there may have been some glitch. I
yes,
wonder if there was a glitch. If you'd like, I can show you the book cover again.
yeah,
The Village with a Long Name by Asha Nehemiah and illustrated by Suvidha Mistry, published by Children's Book Trust. So this village had a unique problem. The names of the streets were so long, and I'm going to give you the name of one of the streets in that village. Makes me chuckle every time I read it. The name of the street was Kabadi Babadi Koko Toko Bambaram Nambaram Sadagudu Chadagudu Nagar. That was the name of the street in one of the streets in the village with a long name. What was their
hmm.
problem? Well, they needed to put up signboards. My God, Asha Nehemiah has you chuckling on every page of the story. And, for all of us reading in our languages, we can identify kabaddi as a game, babadi as a
Hmm.
game, babadi as a
Hmm.
rhyming counterpart.
Rhyming.
So
Hmm.
all the streets, there's one street that has the names of all mithais. So you can just imagine what maza kids and parents will have reading such a book together. And this I would recommend, let's say, for 5+ year olds, to read. But if you're reading, you can read it even when the child is much younger, basically. I'm going to. We have time, do we? I mean,
Yes,
I
yes.
can,
We have time.
tell you, run through maybe two, three more books quite quickly.
Hmm.
But another one that I absolutely adore and admire, called The YY Girl, by a writer that you will be
Yes,
very familiar with, Vaishali, Mahashweta Devi.
Devi. Hmm.
Uh, this one, written by Mahashweta Devi and illustrated by Kanyaka Kini, is such a beautiful book about a young Shabar girl. You all know that Mahashweta Devi worked with the
With
Shabar
this.
tribals
Yes.
in West Bengal, basically. And it's about a girl who never stops asking why. And don't we have children and children like that in our lives, who can never stop asking why, right? Why should I do this? Why does the sun rise from the east, not from the west? The thing
Hmm.
with this story is that it tells you a tale of this curious girl who keeps asking, the author is in the book, and she's working in a samiti in the Shabar village. She keeps asking her all these why questions, and amidst those why questions are these whys. She has to do some work. Okay, before she can go off to school, she has to do some work, so you understand the social, the level from which they come in. And her mother says, Moina, don't forget to thank the Babu for the rice that he sent us. And she says, why should I? Moina asked. Don't I sweep the cowshed and do 1,000 jobs for him? Does he ever thank me? So why
Hmm.
should I? I
Hmm.
mean, such searing, piercing whys that come into it, so subtly bringing the context of uh, you know uh, bringing the inequities in society in a children's book that is really meant for 6+ year olds. I mean, and of course, so beautifully illustrated by Kanyaka Kini. You can, you understand that it's only, as adults, we need to find these books and introduce them to children.
Yes, in
I did.
fact,
Mhm.
Gillo Repertory Theatre, they
Yes,
produced a play called Kyun Kyun Ladki in Hindi,
yes,
based on
yes,
this book. Yes,
yes. In
and I
fact,
think they also have a translation in Hindi, I guess.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Tulika publishes these books in multiple languages, and
Mm.
they certainly have a translation. So, in fact, reading these books in other Indian languages as well, if your mother tongues are, Hindi
Mm.
or Tamil
Mm.
or Kannada or
Mm.
Telugu, you could pick up and read the story, in those languages. I mean, I have, I know you mentioned Unprincess.
Yes.
Read of mine, by Manjula Padmanabhan.
Okay,
The
Vidya,
author
Vidya,
is Manjula
we have lost
Padmanabhan.
your voice. Just come back again. We can't hear you well. Now
Okay.
it's fine. Yeah.
Any,
If you could just
any
repeat what
better
you said.
now?
Yeah, it's better now.
Yeah. Okay. I said, this is a book that I recommend so often to, 8 plus, 7 plus, 8 plus year
Mm.
olds, called Unprincess by Manjula Padmanabhan, written and illustrated by Manjula Padmanabhan. And you know what I love about the book? There are three heroines in this book, braver, bolder, and much more strong than any of the swooning princesses that you find in your fairy tales. They don't let down their golden hair. They don't wait for Prince Charming to come and rescue them. They are feisty, brave, resolute girls who know that they're more capable than many of the princes around, many of the people around, and they go about solving a mystery in their kingdom so marvelously, so wonderfully, at once telling a fantastic story about something that needs to be set right in a particular place, but neatly inverting gender stereotypes so wonderfully well. And I think we need it. We need our girls and boys to know that they don't need to conform to any kind of stereotypes, basically, right? And that they need to be who they are and find strength and self confidence in who they really are. So that's another wonderful book that I would recommend. I have just two more. I mean, I have many more, but I know we
Yeah,
should let our
we have got,
audience.
yes, and we have to also do our question answers. So yes.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll just stick to two more quickly. One that's relevant to these COVID times, a book that came on our shelves very, very recently called When the World Went Dark by Jane D'Souza. It's a beautiful story about a young girl called Swara. And, it's set in our COVID world, in our COVID, in this pandemic time. She loses during lockdown, this 9-year-old girl, or almost 9-year-old girl, loses her grandmother. Now,
Mm.
how many of us today can empathize with that? It may not be somebody from your own family, but it may be someone that your loved ones, your friends, grandparents perhaps. And what does she do? She misses her grandmother terribly. And how does she overcome that grief of losing her grandmother? But, if you think it's a tragic book, it's not. Jane has a fantastic sense of humor, and in the course of this book, there's also a crime that needs to be solved, also a mystery that needs to be solved. So many jokes tucked away inside the pages, a wonderful protagonist solving a crime and a mystery, but at the same time living with the lockdown, living with the effects. I mean, undergoing the pandemic, you're doing schooling online at the moment, basically, right?
Mm, yes,
I think
yes.
it's a very, very, relevant and wonderful book for these times. So I would recommend this one for, say, 10 plus year olds, mostly 9, 10 plus year olds. And one lovely young adult book that I do want to tell everyone about. We had this author, Devika Rangachari, as a guest at our bazaar pretty recently. This fantastic Queens series. This one is called Queen of Ice. It's a wonderful, a portrayal of an ambitious queen in Kashmir. She is Didda, and she is lame, and even though her brother is not exactly the most competent person to take on the throne, the father certainly believes that the son must take on the throne. I mean, get onto the throne of Kashmir. Now, the thing with Didda is that she knows she's a more capable ruler. She knows she has more competencies. And what I love about Devika's book, besides bringing alive the life of a forgotten queen. I'd never heard of Didda before Devika wrote this book, is that she is ruthlessly ambitious, and the author makes no apologies for a woman
Mm.
to be ruthlessly ambitious. And and there are three books in this Queen series. There's Queen of Ice, Queen of Earth, and Queen of Fire, which was just launched about 10, 15 days ago, I'm assuming. Fabulous reads for our young adults. And you can see the diversity that exists in these books. You can see the variety that there is. It's not that we don't have books of humor. It's not that don't have books that are just pure fun. But the Indian publishing industry now, just bringing you a plethora of books for your children. So I'll always tell, for parents who are struggling, or teachers who are struggling to find the right reads for their children, do write to us at Funky Rainbow. Do get in touch with the independent bookstore in your city, a children's bookstore. They will certainly recommend the right books for your children.
There you go. It's www.funkyrainbow.com, and please log in. And if you get a chance every Saturday, it's a brilliant show. I mean, I'm sorry I never bought any books, but you're just that the whole part that you do while you're recommending and talking about the books itself is such a delight to watch. Uh,
Thank
so
you.
so please keep doing that, because it is doing a lot of good to a lot of people who are buying and
To
not buying
us
your
as
books.
well, to us as well, who are locked down so badly in these COVID
Yes,
times. I was just going to say one thing, just one thing before you get on the questions. I know you said, what about those parents who are
yes,
challenged
no,
and
yes.
can't seem to find, I've just got to say this, Vaishali. You
Hmm.
know what? A child learns earliest and first from home, and your child has got to see you reading for pleasure. Reading your email on the phone doesn't count. Reading an article on the Kindle or iPad doesn't count, really. You have got to, on one Sunday, maybe just take 2 hours out and read your favorite book. It could be a
And it's
business
good for
book.
you
It could
also. It's also
Yes,
good for
you need
you.
that break. You need to, and so don't expect your child to become a fantastic reader if you yourself don't do it. I mean, you can probably both together become readers as well. That's why I said, go to your local library or go to the local independent bookstore, find books, sit down, read for 2 hours. It's 2 hours in 7 days in a week. It's not that hard. And it's a lot better for you as well. I'm sure. I can tell you that for sure, really. Right.
Thank you for answering that. All right. So, time for taking up some questions. I think we'll take up some comments, because many of them are writing, um, I mean, sharing their experiences and what they feel.
Oh, lovely.
So, maybe let me just scroll up. Um, Carissa is asking, Dear Vidya, what is that one message you would like to give to fellow Indians who want to write children's books, but they are not sure if there will be good enough takers? They write for the older people then. What do you have to say? Yeah.
No, don't just get disheartened. Writing is a tough process. I agree. Getting published is really a complicated process, but there's no better time than now to write. If you have the creative urge, if you have the creative bent of mind, and if you have a story to tell, test it. I tell a lot of parents, because many people who write have first done it for their own kids, basically, right? Test it on your children, test it on your children's friends, and sit down and put pen to paper. Because there are many publishing houses, and the professionals will help you through the publishing process. But don't get disheartened. Make sure that you put that pen to paper. If not anything, you can compile it into a clutch of stories to be shared just by your own family. I mean, it's so easy to put these books and have them printed and give, I mean, just as individual copies to give away just within your own family. We're doing like a family recipe book at the moment. We're trying to compile recipes. I can't cook to save my life. So I feel it's the need of the hour to, get my family members to give me some, wonderful recipes. So you can and you should write if you feel the urge to tell a story. There's no better time than now to do it.
Hmm. There you go. Asha Nemia Nehemiah. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right.
Yes.
So she's just written that best recommendations come from indie bookstore staff. Make friends with your indie bookstore. Very,
Such
very important.
Such a
Uh,
lovely comment from one of our finest children's writers to date. Somebody's stories who bring out a chuckle every time you pick up the book. The Village with the Longest Name was hers. I can tell you about so many other books of Asha's, but she's absolutely right. Even as somebody who seeks books myself, I mean, and sometimes I think I'm just inundated reading children's books. So sometimes I want to just get away and read a lot of adult books. My first go to place is some wonderful indie bookstores in my own city, because they, you can go back to them even after a year and they'll remember, they'll say, I know you picked up some translations last time. Do you think you'd like a couple of nice translations to read this time? It really makes sense. They are the custodians of your reading habit more than anyone else, really. So I think what Asha says is so absolutely true, that make friends with your local librarians and make friends with your local indie booksellers.
all right. There are so many comments. I'm still sifting through a few. Uh, Carissa, Carissa's, we have taken her question.
I can see one from Madhura Mitra, I think.
Yes, yes. I have a question. How can we, as teachers, involve students in storytelling and story writing both parallelly at this point of time?
Yeah, Madhur, that's a good question, Madhura. But for me, I always say that, both storytelling and story writing have one origin, and that is story reading. So the
Hmm.
first thing that you really need to do, both to write and to tell stories, is to read them. And, I think teachers like you who are interested can play such a wonderful role. I mean, I know, you're, going through perhaps what is the most challenging experience of teaching children online, through the COVID year. I say, leave those textbooks aside. I mean, take on other supplementary reading material. The Indian children's space is full of, publishing world is full of wonderful books. I know, for instance, children have to study about Salim Ali, the Birdman, right from grade 2 or grade 3 till they go to grade 10. His grandniece, Zai Whitaker, has written such wonderful books about the life and times of Salim Ali, the Birdman of India. My suggestion to teachers is use those books. They are more colorfully produced, they're more excitingly written, and you will attain the exact same objective that you want to with your textbook, basically, right? You draw children into reading, and when they do, those that have an inclination to write or those that have an inclination to narrate stories will just naturally take to it and will naturally just do it. But as a teacher, your job is to introduce them to the right kind of books. Often, and I know this from experience as adults, whether we're teachers, parents, librarians, aunts, we tend to foist our own choices on
Yes.
children, right? Oh, I read Madame Bovary growing up, really, right? And Gustave Flaubert was the best writer under the sun at that point in time. The thing
Hmm.
is, your child may or may not pick up that Dickens, may or may not pick up that Flaubert. Try to find those books that connect to their taste. If they're really crazy about dinosaurs, try to find them some good books about dinosaurs. If they're
Hmm.
crazy about superheroes, try to find them some lovely books about superheroes. It's only in that way can you slowly draw them into the world of reading, and don't be judgmental. As adults, I would hate it if somebody looked over my shoulder to say, man, what you're reading is right, what you're reading is wrong, really, right?
Yes. Or
If
what
we
are you
don't
reading?
do that,
Yeah.
ah, ask me $1 million question. Like, okay, I have at any given point in time at least 10 books open, and that I'm reading. And this one, which I know the author of this book, but I did want to say that, I mean, I have been reading it recently because I'm just a reader and not a teacher, not a trained practitioner who works with kids. But this one by Kamala Mukunda, saying, "What did you ask at school today?" In fact, it's also for Madhura Mitra. It's such a beautiful book, that goes into why our education system has to encourage children, not so much about getting the right answers, but
Yes.
asking the right
Right
question,
questions. To
right?
that, just to add that, because you brought this topic up and this book, very relevant. I have this book which is called Asking Better Questions. I don't know if you'll
Oh,
find a copy. This is a textbook, actually. If you, this is like, it gives you a step by step procedure of how to plan your questions as a teacher. Questioning is such an important,
yes,
aspect in teaching. If you,
yes.
I mean, your teaching standards actually get covered by just asking the right kind of questions.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
I mean, the sign of those whys, as adults, don't, I know it can be terribly annoying. You're, doing a Zoom call and there's like various things going on, and your children are asking you, why, can I do this? Can I not do that? And
Yeah.
you just get quite bogged down. And I understand it's so easy to say it if you don't practice
Mm,
it yourself, really, right? But those whys are just absolutely the right way to go forward, to encourage that curiosity, to encourage that imagination. Your children will never be bored if you encourage that in them. And so she has it's a very well researched and insightful book, and we
mm,
do have copies of What Did You Ask at School Today at Funky Rainbow, published by HarperCollins. I just felt so many parents and teachers come to ask us these questions, and for me, maybe some insights about the learning process at the moment would be useful
mm.
to answer those questions. So I'm reading this, but I'll be reading some strange pulp fiction. There's a draft anthology of Tamil pulp fiction that I'm reading. So my reading tastes are just, there's no method in that madness at all. Basically, Vaishali, I just read compulsively. People recommend lovely books to me,
Mm.
writers and friends. And so right now, the Tamil anthology of pulp fiction, and what should I ask at school? What did you ask at school
What did
today?
you ask at school today?
What did you ask at school today?
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think I'll just take one more comment. It's Shashwat's comment, actually. And
Okay.
he is writing, I remember as a very young child, I used to read a lot of British books and then got disheartened not to find brooks and streams in Lucknow.
I love that comment, Shashwat. Like I read Enid Blyton's compulsively, and the picnics that they went to, the scones that they would open, they would be eating, tin of sardines, they would be eating tongue. And when you went on picnics, there would be upma and curd rice, basically, right? And I'm like,
Yes.
okay, why does this not sound like the Enid Blyton kind of picnics? Today, fortunately, you can pick out books where you can crunch into a jalebi, eat like a Mysore Pak maybe, and lots of books that are, there in this culturally, very culturally relevant, with a lot of things that children can see around them. So maybe, hopefully, children like, you who went to British Council can now find maybe nalas and gullies and gully cricket and IPL and all of that in the books, basically, right?
Thank you so much, Vidya. I think we we have overshot. It's already 7:03. But thank you so much for doing this session and sharing your thoughts and your views and your recommendations with all of us. And thank you everybody who has been with us throughout this session. Thank you so much for your comments, for your questions, and I hope to see all of you next week again. Next week is 50th, and it's going to be a
Oh,
special
yes.
edition, a special episode. And please do visit funkyrainbow.com. And I'm going to pick up a few books that you have recommended right now. So
That
I'm
is
just
just
going to go and do
wonderful.
that.
I would like to thank the audience as well for on a Saturday evening, really, coming and watching in such large numbers. Thank you to everyone, and do get in touch with us at Funky Rainbow if you have any queries. But thank you so much, Vaishali, for having, me in Method in Madness, and
Madness,
here's
yes.
meeting
But
you.
thank you, thank you. It's a pleasure. It's my pleasure to have you over here. I wanted to bring you I mean, a couple of months ago, but things didn't work out, but now you're here, and thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Everybody,
And
please subscribe to Funky Rainbow on Facebook, and I think, are you on Insta?
on Insta as Traveling
Yes,
Bookshop,
as
on
Traveling
Facebook
Bookshop.
as Funky Rainbow. Yes.
All right. Please do subscribe, and do subscribe to our channel, Joy of Drama. We do these conversations every week, and we try to bring in like-minded people and talk about arts, children, and everything around that. All right. Thank you, Vidya.
Thank
Have
you.
a
And
have a lovely
bye bye.
evening. Good night. Good
Thank
night to
you.
everyone.
Yeah. Stay booked.